everybody out there is just posting, oh, you know, this is how much I spent. My problem with that as an accountant is that that in itself doesn't really tell you how you should allocate the money and time that you've got to all of the different things that go into producing a book. Now, you've probably seen this project management meme before. Time, cost, quality, pick any two. I'd like to reframe this a little bit because the quality of your product is actually the end result of the inputs. You're not really choosing between time, cost, and quality. What you're really choosing between is time, cost, and the level of skill and experience that you put into producing your product. To help you make those decisions, I want to talk about something that's known as the MVP model. Now, this term comes from the startup world and it stands for minimum viable product. That is, what is the bare minimum that your customer is going to pay for this product? It may not be perfect, it may be missing some features, it might not have all the shiny things that make it all pretty and stuff, but the MVP solves a burning problem that the customer has. You can apply the same model to self-publishing and your title. What is it that your title does at its core to help solve somebody's problem? That could be as simple as your reader is bored, they love fantasy novels, and they read it primarily for escapism. That's me, hello. Maybe you've got a consulting business or something like that, and self-publishing a book is really going to help you establish your authority in the field and act as a bit of a marketing or promo lead for your actual consultancy services. Or maybe you're like me, you've been looking for some books, particular books for your kid, and you just cannot find them out there. So it's an educational reason. Whatever burning problem that your customer is trying to solve, that is the bare minimum you need to hit in order for your book to be worth somebody's while to buy. And that is basically your MVP. Everything that you do should be focused on delivering that MVP. That is the one thing that you should not be cutting any corners on. In the self-publishing world, frequent and consistent publishing is key to making sure that your titles get traction. Once you break it down in terms of the release frequency that you have to hit, you can then figure out how long you actually have in terms of time to spend on the book production process. And keep in mind that you may not be able to work on this every single day. So what you should be doing is looking at your comparable titles, especially the ones doing really well. What are those authors doing in terms of how frequently they are publishing? From what I understand, the frequency of publication in romance is something like at least one a month, maybe more frequently. If you're doing something like fantasy, then that's at least once every 6 months. I was aiming to do children's picture books, which meant I was setting a release frequency goal of roughly 3 per year, so 1 every 4 months. My production process kind of goes through 4 phases. I've got the writing or the creating process. I then have the editing and revising process that includes doing all of my beta reads and advanced reviewer copies. Then I've got the actual publication process, which includes things like typesetting and formatting the book and doing all of the metadata stuff on Ingram Spark and all that business. And then I finally got a marketing and promotional bit. Those phases are kind of loose, they're not exactly sequential, and you'll be, you know, some of them will overlap with each other as you go through the process. I really only have a month of time to spend on actually creating a book. The maximum amount of time I can afford to spend on the actual writing of the text is probably 1 or 2 days. And the reason is illustrations take so much time. For my last book, I basically broke it down into spreads and I did 1 spread per day, but that's still like 15 days. I can only really work on my book 3 or 4 days when my daughter is in daycare, so 15 to 20 days, that's my month gone. Invest in the highest level of skill and experience that you can afford for your MVP. For myself, illustrations are a critical part of children's picture books generally. It's really the illustrations that draw in and engage the children. However, I thought really long and hard about whether I should pay somebody else to do the illustrations, and I ended up deciding no. The reason for that is there is no way that I could actually afford to pay an illustrator. In fact, I think if I were paying for my book on market rates based on the things that I have in there, I would be paying something like $15,000 for the illustrations, and $15,000 is not an amount that I can afford to lose on this gamble. My next question was, do I have the minimum level of skill or experience in illustrations to make this work? So I do not have a great deal of skill in illustration. I can draw things that look like the thing they're intended to be, and I definitely have an art style that is quite cartoon-like in nature. My book is not going to have the best illustrations possible. There are loads of other books out there in my particular niche that are better illustrated. But when I come back to what is my MVP, it's about creating an enjoyable reading experience for a parent and a child in a bilingual household where you're trying to learn Cantonese. There's actually a story arc, an emotional connection to the characters, and it actually rhymes in both languages. And I can only get away with illustrating my own books because, one, the illustrations are not as critical a part of my MVP as some of the other elements of my book, and two, it's a kid's book. If I was trying to illustrate my own cover for an adult fantasy novel, like, that would just be a total fail and I would not do it. In my last video, I talked about how you should spend no more than what you can afford to lose because all publishing is basically gambling. While you can do many things without a lot of upfront cash outlay that don't compromise the quality of your MPV, you've got to remember that every time you're choosing to DIY something, you're making a trade-off in terms of either your time or the level of skill and expertise. So the fact that I don't have this high level of skill in illustration means it just takes me longer. Those first couple of illustrations, like, there was a lot of trial and error there. That was a trade-off that I made intentionally, knowing that I could not afford the $15,000 it would cost to pay an illustrator market rate to illustrate my book. And the thing with the trade-off is the more time you're going to sink into one element of your book, the less time you're going to have to spend on other elements of the book. The biggest takeaway I had from doing my first book is that writing the book is such a tiny fraction of the overall process and the overall business of self-publishing, like maximum 20%. The rest of it is all about marketing and distribution and promotion and all the other stuff that a publisher does for an author. So if that doesn't sound like it's for you, then maybe reconsider whether you want to self-publish, or consider to the extent to which you want to be involved in the self-publishing process, because turns out publishers do a lot of work for authors. I'm finding it a real struggle to find the time to continue promoting my first book while also having time to do the second, and while also building my author platform and branding on the side. All of these things take time. So when you're thinking about where to spend your time and money, you've really got to think about what are the things that are not worth outsourcing to somebody else, because you can do them better, or it is more effective if you do them, or you're gonna gain some sort of insight from doing it yourself. So for example, things like building a following on Instagram, my email list, all of those things. The most effective way of building that following is to cultivate that kind of personal relationship with that audience. And so I can't really outsource that to anybody else. If I had paid an illustrator to do all of that illustration work, things like that are very difficult trade-offs. It's really hard to say because I would have had an entire month to focus on really marketing and promoting my books. If I had spent all my time learning how to market and promote my book instead, who knows how many copies my book would have sold, right? And maybe I would have been able to sell enough to recoup enough of those illustrator expenses. Don't know. So that's something I want to think about for future books. I just want to say one final thing in relation to cost. After that point where you've delivered on your MVP, you can do more stuff if you like, but really I would encourage you to just push that MVP out, publish it, get feedback on it, learn from the process, and take forward any learnings to the next book. There is like no naturally good point to draw a line as to when you're going to stop spending money on improving the level of skill and experience that's going into your book. You can always hire a better cover designer. You can always pay for a more experienced editor. The list of things that you can spend money on, there is no ceiling on that, right? Like there is always going to be something better out there. Is this extra money that I'm spending, is it going to deliver at least that amount of value to the person who's going to buy my book? And if the answer is no, it's not really going to deliver that same amount of value, don't spend the money. Personally, if I had extra time and money left over, I would just put it all into marketing and promotion, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you produce the greatest book in the world if nobody knows about it and nobody is buying it, because that just defeats the purpose of publishing the book in the first place. So that's it for this video. I hope that was helpful. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe for more videos on the business side of self-publishing. And let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos.